Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the search for truth. Today, we're going to start diving into what I really experienced as the first hint of, dipping my toe into the water in the mindset world. Now, I'd seen a lot of things about manifesting and these ideas of, I call them woo-woo, very woo-woo, about, think it into existence. And there was this movie that came out, they framed it as a documentary, it was called The Secret, that talked a lot about, well, just think about things and it will create anything you want. And I was very skeptical when I first dove into success principles and how to run a business and how to be successful as an entrepreneur. I was looking more at concrete applications, less philosophy, more business structure. However, the more and more I dug in and researched, the more I realized there was something in addition to proper procedures and structure that had to be a component of success. So I started dipping my toe into the water of different ideologies and different principles of success. And one of the first books I came across, it was a very old book called As a Man Thinketh. It starts off with a little poem. It kind of sets the tone for the entire book. The poem goes like this: Mind is the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind, and evermore he takes. The tool of thought, and shaping what he wills, brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. The idea behind the entire book is the way that we think has a profound effect on our entire life. It has an effect on what we see in the world. It has effect on whether we achieve success or not. It really is that first principle of success. How you think affects everything else. We are here to look at these principles and dig in and see if we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this actually is a sound principle on which we can base our success. So when we're talking about as a man thinketh and just this idea that we shape our reality through our thoughts, this is not a new concept. We see this principle coming up all throughout our history. In the book, it specifically references Proverbs 23:7 that says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." The full context there is talking about the way that a man thinks affects the rest of his world. So what we want to look at is where this thought comes from and how it actually works in reality and whether it actually has any bearing on our success. Does it really all start in the mind? The principle that James Allen put forth was, if you think about success, if you think successful thoughts, if you approach success from the right mind frame, you will inevitably achieve success. The other way to look at it is, he was saying that if you are trying and striving for success and you're unable to get it, then you have to look at your mind because you are not thinking successful thoughts in your mind. The way that you think about something has everything to do with whether it's going to come into existence or not. This is an interesting concept because the idea that our thoughts control our realities very much puts us completely responsible for our lives. This is a very big focus on personal responsibility for our success. And while that may not sound like a big deal on the face of it, saying, yes, of course we're responsible for our success, if you think about it, it also means we're personally responsible for our failures. And that concept is not always the easiest to grasp. It's really easy for us to say, well, I can't be responsible for not thinking properly when the marketing isn't working, or I can't be responsible for people not buying. But this concept that James Allen put forth in his book was saying, no, it really all does come down to what you think. And again, he's not the first to think that. But when we look back at ancient philosophy, we also see this popping up. Plato specifically believed that the world that we see, what we call reality, is just a shadow of our inner world. He called this the world of forms or the world of ideas. According to Plato's philosophy, truth and reality begin in the mind. In a perfect realm, there's this just formless substance from which we create all things, and we create it with our minds. And physical reality is just a reflection of these ideal forms. In other words, it's an imperfect copy. For example, a chair. A chair is more real in your mind than it is in physical reality. The physical reality exists just because a person's mind formed the idea idea of a chair, and the actual idea is what's real, whereas the chair is a reflection of that reality. So for Plato, the mind and the inner world were more real than what we would commonly call reality. Now, Aristotle didn't go that far. He didn't believe that forms were more real than reality. He believed that reality exists, obviously, and that there is a physical world. Things don't just happen in the mind. But he believed that we could affect the outside world through our thought and reason. His biggest thing that he said on this particular topic was that a person can actualize their potential by the way that they think and the way they interact with the world, which makes a lot of sense. While he didn't specifically say your thoughts create reality, like physical reality, he did believe that your thoughts, specifically your belief in certain things and belief in the right way to approach thinking, was essential to shaping your individual life and fulfilling your purpose. So it's interesting when we look back, we can see there's no new thing under the sun. This idea has been around for forever, but the question is this true? Is this real? Do our thoughts really have that big of an impact? A lot of people believe that what we see in the outside world, like the experiences that we have, the results that we're getting specifically in our business, are just kind of haphazard. It's this idea that luck plays a very large role in whether or not we succeed in business. I personally believe that that's not true. I believe that our ideas and our thoughts and our beliefs shape our results, and our results are just a reflection of what we are thinking and doing. The first part of success has to do with the way you're thinking and what you believe. But don't just take my word for it as we dig in. I always want to make sure that we are looking at things beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's more to this than just philosophy. Even though I love philosophy, like I've told you, I have a degree in philosophy and psychology. I could sit here and talk all these abstract philosophical terms all day. There is something that's really interesting that says, okay, Aristotle, Plato, James Allen, the Bible, this idea of thoughts shaping reality might actually be true. And if we dig in to science, we can see that these are actually grounded in quantum physics. When we look at quantum physics explains why or how our thoughts shape reality. If you're not familiar with quantum physics is a mind-blowing field where this idea of Newtonian physics, so Newton first posited the idea that, an apple falls from a tree, bonks him on the head. He then discovers gravity because very clearly there has to be a force in action that we can't see. Quantum physics came on the scene and blew everything up. One of the most well-known quantum physics experiments is what's known as the double-slit experiment. It proves this idea that thoughts actually shape reality. Now, the first double-slit experiment was done in 1801 by Thomas Young, and he was a British physicist. He was trying to basically look at light. He wasn't trying to prove quantum physics or quantum theory at all, but he was trying to prove that light behaves like a wave, not like a particle. Was light a wave or a particle? This was a huge debate in physics back in the 1800s, all the way up through the 1900s, and when we finally got quantum physics. When you're visualizing this, and you're visualizing the difference between a wave and a particle, you would think of a stone being plopped into a pond and it creates these waves that expand out. That's the idea of light behaving like a wave. It ripples out versus a particle, which would be like throwing a dart at a board and the dart hits a very specific point. It doesn't ripple out. So Young was trying to prove that light was a wave because previously it had been thought of as a particle. And this is where he did the double slit experiment, where he was basically shining light through a slit to see if it acted like a wave or acted like particle. Now, again, this is getting really deep into mathematics and physics, and I do not have a degree in this, but basically, when you're looking at whether something behaves as a wave or a particle, if light were to behave as a wave, what would happen is when it passes through a slit, think about how water, if it passes through a tiny little canyon or a tiny slit in rock, water, when it goes through, it squishes in and then it expands out and acts as a wave and it goes out. And if there are two slits, then you'll see water coming through one slit and it creates a wave on the other side, water coming out through the other slit and it creates a wave on the other side. And then those waves or the ripples merge and then it affects each other's wave patterns. That's an interference pattern. Now, a particle is if you're pushing light through two slits, and a light is a particle, then it's just going to show up on the other side as a tiny pinprick, a tiny point in space. It's going to be a dot, not a wave, or a particle, not a wave. So that's the idea behind the double slit experiment. They were pushing light through two slits to see if on the other side it either acted like a wave or it acted like a particle. And he found that we actually had light acting like a wave. It was displaying wave-like properties. So this was a huge deal back in the early 1800s because up until that point, it was a big debate that light was actually a particle, not a wave. But where quantum physics comes in and quantum theory, where it really became popular and became a much more accepted theory of physics, when people like Niels Bohr, he's a very famous, some people call him the founder of quantum physics, or Werner Heisenberg, they were looking at this same idea with a double slit experiment, looking at whether light behaved as a particle or a wave. During this double slit experiment, though, they weren't trying to prove that it acted like a wave or a particle because different experiments had shown it could act as both. In the experiment that they were doing, sometimes when they passed light through the double slits, it acted like particles, and sometimes it acted like a wave. What was absolutely crazy was that they discovered that whether or not they were looking at the electrons that they used, particles that they were using, determined how it showed up. In other words, these double slit experiments would show either a particle or a wave function, but it was determined by what's known as the observer effect. Someone looking at the experiment affected the outcome. When we're looking at this, when no one was observing it, so basically what they would do, just to reiterate, they had the two slits and they would push things like electrons or photons, basically little pieces of light or pieces of matter, through these two slits to see if it showed up as a particle or a wave. When no one was looking at the particles or looking at the photons being shoved through, then the particles went through and acted like waves. They interfered with each other. They created that interference pattern that we talked about, as if it had gone through, one little particle had gone through both slits at the same time, like water. And then the interference on the other side showed waves. But they discovered that when scientists set up a detector to observe which slit the particle was actually going through, the pattern that they saw changed completely. So instead of having a wave function on the other side where you had interference and the data was showing an interference pattern, then you just had, when something was actually observing this, you just had two stripes, like you would see from physical matter or particles going through. What this double slit experiment proved was that just by the act of observing the experiment, in other words, literally by the act of measuring what was happening, the scientists changed the outcomes. This was one of the first times that we were able to show with science that conscious observation plays a role in shaping physical reality. So, coming back to the question, can our thoughts shape reality? It has been proven in quantum physics that our minds actually do shape reality at that subatomic level, or the electron level, or the photon level. So this experiment shows us that the act of a human observing something changes the outcome. In other words, what we're thinking about in the experiment has an effect on the experiment itself. Nothing else changed. It was just a human's presence observing something. In my mind, this does prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we have the ability to affect reality just with our thoughts. It's not just woo-woo. It's not just science fiction. It's not just some philosophical text that Plato wrote way back when. It has actually been proven that our thoughts have an actual physical impact in the physical world. What does this mean for success? This means that it is so vitally important for you to actually watch what you're thinking about, because your thoughts have an effect on what happens in your reality. Your thoughts create your reality. If you are experiencing something that you do not want, the first place you have to look is, how am I thinking about it? Because you are the one creating it. For today, just know that science has actually proven that your thoughts affect reality. When we're thinking about success principles, you have to remember your thoughts about something actually affect the outcome that you get. So if you are currently experiencing results in your life, either in your business, in your relationships, in your health, if you're experiencing something that you do not like, the very first place you need to look is, how am I thinking about it? Because it is very, very likely that your thoughts are, at least in part, causing this reality. Hopefully this was helpful to help you understand this idea behind why the woo-woo is out there, what it actually means, how it actually makes scientific sense. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment. Let me know if you want to learn more about this. And go out and get James Allen's book, As a Man Thinketh. It's fantastic. And I will talk to you all next time on the next episode of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, The Search for Truth.